intention is such a powerful thing. So, when we created this, I was so fortunate to just fall into this opportunity with Lisa. So the more that we talked about what would we like to create here under the LeadHERship Global banner, and talked with Linda about what she wanted to see come out of these roundtables, it was just so obvious that Lisa and I were just so much aligned in our intentions. So I love it that all of you have started with your intentions as well. Our intention actually for this group is to really, it's funny, some of you have said clarity. Literally, our intention is to facilitate clarity on what it means to be conscious in leadership. So to gain insight in how we live and lead consciously, how to support real integration of consciousness into our lives and our leadership. It's so easy to say I'm conscious. Well, I'm awake, I'm alert, right? I'm conscious, but what does it mean to be really conscious in the way that we live and the way that we lead? There's a fun little acronym that we created. So if you take LEAD, we start with leaning into meaning and intentionality, eliminating obstacles and limitations, accessing personal power and internal authority, developing authentic relationships and heart-based connections. And I love seeing that so much, what so many of you are asking for. Like, as I'm watching the chat, what would you like to leave with? That's so aligned. It's beautiful. We have set a premise here for our shared creation, and that is that we will hold all humans as equal in value and sovereignty. We will respect every contribution, and we will remember that everyone has their own experience, their own choices, and will find their own answers. So as we share our experiences with being conscious in our own leadership, that's not meant to be the path and the one and only path to being conscious in your leadership. This is all about you having your experience, making your own choices, and finding your own answers. We do ask some things of you. So let me tell you what we would like for you to agree to as we come into this experience. We're going to ask you to practice that awareness of what we think of as the space between. So just practice that awareness, practice noticing, practice being in conscious choice, practice listening before responding, respect time sharing. We only have 90 minutes. We could spend half a day. So we're going to respect time sharing, respect opinions, both those that are aligned and those that are different from yours. Own your experience here. Speak to the behavior, not to the person, and trust the group and the process in transparency, in kindness, and in appreciation. So we as hosts will be holding ourselves to those commitments. We're human. If we falter, let us know, because it can happen. And we'll also be facilitating that experience for all of us in our time together. So to make that easier, especially the honoring time sharing and making sure that we get everyone's input, we are going to ask that you use the raise hand option in your Zoom settings. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, if there's nothing showing up, just move your mouse down there. So just move your mouse to the bottom of the screen and the options will pop up. You'll see one that says reactions. So right at the bottom of your screen that says reactions, you can use the fun little emojis that are in there, but you can also raise your hand. So we will have time for sharing, and we'll do the presentation, which is me getting to talk as fast as possible because I have a lot that I could share, and I'm not going to get it all in today because that's how it's going to be. But we're gonna do a presentation on the concept so that we have a starting place for the discussion. We're going to go into breakout rooms for some discussion. Then we'll come back and share what came to us in that breakout opportunity. And that's when you'll want to use that hand raise option. We'll also keep an eye on chat. So Lisa's going to help me monitor chat during the presentation, and we'll collect questions and make sure that we try to answer your questions. So today I'm going to be talking about identity, who you are, and really more who you think you are. So I want you just to do a little exercise with just, if you've got something to write on, which would be great, I want you just to grab a piece of paper, pen, napkin, crayon, whatever you've got handy. And I want you just to write at the top, I am. I am. And just start making a list. I am. What follows those two words? Two of the most powerful words. In fact, one of the one of the original names that we had for the divine, I am. What follows that for you? What comes up? And just very quickly, I am. And isn't it interesting to notice some of the things that come up first? Yeah, I am. And as you get those, I want you to notice how many of those are circumstantial, situational. How many of the I ams that came up, they weren't true maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And some of those things are just inherent. They don't change. They're who you have been since you came into the world. Maybe you've written some things that are who you were before you came into the world. Some understandings of who you are. And you're starting to see that some of the things are identity. Some of the things that you say I am, it's just an identity. And some of the things are the true you. So I'd love for you to just start with seeing the difference between things that you've adopted into the I am statement and things that maybe other people have brought you into as the I am statement. Those of you who wrote, I am a mother or I am a father, that wasn't true until somebody else came into the world and made you one, right? At 10, I didn't say I am a consultant. That would have been a bit silly. But I've spent some years being a consultant, and now I no longer really say I'm a consultant because that's not my choice of the work that I bring to the table. So what are those things that they're just circumstantial, situational? Yeah, and if you want to share in chat some of the things that came up, sharing always creates a different level of understanding. It's funny when we bring something into recognizable material visual space, it takes on new levels of understanding and attributes. So that's why I love chat. It's honestly why I love to see you share in chat. It's not so that other people even benefit from what you've shared, although we do. It's because you benefit at a different level when you share it, when you get it outside of yourself where you can look at it. So if there's anything that you want to share, yes, the difference between identity and the true you. That's exactly what we're going to talk about because you are not your identity. You are not your identity. Your identity is something you created, consciously or by default. Think about anything that can change isn't the true you. Do you have the same identity of yourself that you did 10 years ago? Certainly not 20 years ago. At 5, my identity was very different. Some of the attributes were the same, but my identity was very different, right? So identity is your creation. The true you is who you are. Interesting premise, isn't it? Because so many of us, we think, well, identity is me. But you identify as a lot of things. Thank you. Yeah. You identify as a lot of things that you may not choose to identify as in the future, or that you may not have identified as in the past. And yet, our behavior comes directly out of our identity. So I'm going to do a little screen sharing because sometimes it's easier to follow along if you've got some visuals, right? So let's just look at identity. This is my working definition. This is not a widely accepted definition. Unless somebody's worked with me, they've probably never heard this definition. So I'm certainly not submitting it as the definition for identity, but it's a very useful working definition, meaning I can work with this. This is what I work with clients, is the understanding of identity as this is just my current, right now in the present, the way I understand myself, the way I experience myself, and the way I express myself. So it's a current understanding, experience, and expression of my true self, right? So it's a filter. I think of identity very much like a kaleidoscope. Everything in the kaleidoscope is really you. You can't really have an identity that isn't you because, we're infinite. We contain everything. Everything in the kaleidoscope's you. Well, you keep turning it. You keep turning it, right? I have a different view in the kaleidoscope than I did, 10 years ago. Probably so do you, which is why we get into this whole thing in personal transformation. I don't do personal development. That's really not my, I don't think of it as developing the person. It's not me doing anything. But if you want to transform your experience of the world, you're going to transform your experience of yourself. Yeah. And people say, well, then your old identity has to die. You ever heard that? The old identity has to die. Guess what? Your old identity doesn't want to die. Big surprise, right? Your old identity has no interest in dying so that you can have this transformative experience. And it doesn't have to die. It gets rearranged. So look at your I am statements and ask yourself, what clues might you have about how you're understanding who you are? What clues might you have about how you're experiencing yourself? Because that will tell you a lot about how you're expressing yourself. And I always say, how you show up determines what shows up for you. It's just true. How you show up determines what shows up for you. So that expression of self, that expression of your identity is absolutely going to determine how you show up and what shows up for you. So when I think about this with leaders, the first thing that I notice is how we show up to people, whether we consider ourselves leading them or whether they're simply looking to us for guidance. They're looking to us for taking some responsibility for a project. They're just, they look to us. How are we showing up? How are we showing up as leaders? That will come directly from how we're understanding and experiencing ourselves. So we try to create this persona as a leader. We say, hey, this is how I need to show up as a leader. And we tend to start with how we show up and not start with the structure of how do we understand and experience ourselves. Transforming our leadership starts with our identity. Yeah, I'm gonna chat. Y'all are just welcome to share, or you're welcome to just take it in. You've heard this saying: when somebody shows you who they are, fill in the blank. Right? We always hear if somebody shows you who they are, believe them. But they aren't really showing you who they are. When somebody shows you who they are, what they're really showing you is who they think they are, the structure that they're in, and the way they believe they need to behave in order to get what they want. What do you think that's based on? That's based on their identity, their structure. It has nothing to do with you, but guess what? It has nothing to do with them either. We don't believe who they are. We just believe that's the structure they're in right now. That's the belief system they're in right now. And I got to tell you, as a leader and just as a navigator of this thing that we call life, that's huge relief. This needing to go around and figure out who people really are and judge them accordingly to know what I can and can't expect from them is a huge emotional burden.
Dixie, could you perhaps speak to what you mean by the word structure? The question's been asked, what you're speaking of there.
Yeah. What do I mean by the structure they're in? So our structure, let me go back. Our structure is everything from our beliefs, our emotions, our underlying, chemistry, our genetic memory and makeup, our ancestral memories, all of that becomes our personal structure. So when we talk about the structure of identity, we're talking about what you value, what you're afraid of, what you believe about yourself, the world, and others. I call that your personal identity narrative. It's all of that makes up the structure you're in. So here's the thing about structure. When we're in conscious leadership, we're looking at behavior not as an indication of who the person is. Are they good or bad? Are they trustworthy or not? We're seeing it as this is the structure they're in, meaning this is their belief system. This is how they're identifying. This is the personal identity narrative they have about how the world works and how they function in it and what they have to do in the world to get what they want. A conscious leader can just choose according to seeing the persons in the structure without judging the person. Does that make sense? Cool.
Thank
Cool.
you. Very
So
good.
it's not personal. That's the real emotional relief to me, is that it is not personal. I don't need to be in this position as a leader of judging another person. I can simply look at the structure. Now, how do I know what structure they're in? Because structure has integrity. And that means that the structure, the behavior, the outcomes they're creating are always because of the structure they're in. Think about it this way. A rocking chair is going to rock. Why? Because it has a structure of a curved base that will rock. A ball is going to roll. That's just the structure of a ball. A structure has integrity in how it behaves. A fence, not going to roll unless you give it a lot of force, right? That's not its structure. A person who's in a structure where they believe that a certain behavior will result in less pain or more pleasure is going to exhibit that behavior, even if in that situation, it doesn't result in more pleasure or less pain. How many times have you seen someone else or done it yourself? Raise hand here. Me, totally done things. I'm just like, why did I do that? Why do I keep doing that? Or, in situations where I'm coaching a team, why do they keep doing that? Why does that person keep repeating that behavior? It's not working for them. The answer is at some point it did. And at some point it worked for them consistently enough that it became part of their structure. It became part of their beliefs. It became part of their default. It became part of their identity. And at that point, they're going to continue that behavior on default, even if it's not working in this situation. In fact, when it doesn't work in this situation, they just get really frustrated because it ought to work. My belief system says it works. Why isn't it working for me? Right? So it's not about you. It's not about them. Every person is simply choosing and behaving the way they believe is going to result in more pleasure or less pain. They're trying to feel the way they want to feel. The interesting thing that we get to notice is that it's our natural program to move away from pain more emphatically, powerfully, and determinedly and consistently than we move towards pleasure. So quite often the behavior that you're seeing in others or yourself is not designed to create pleasure. It's designed to avoid short-term pain. Because our identity is designed to protect itself. Short-term pain can even be, if I hear what you're saying, I won't know who I am anymore. If I hear what you're saying, I might believe I'm a bad person. If I hear what you're saying, I might believe this other person that I love is a bad person. I'm avoiding short-term pain. I'm not moving toward pleasure, right? That's just our identity structure. But when you're in this method of viewing the world, this lens of it's not personal, it's not about you, it's not about them, then you can address behavior and not the individual. You don't have to compromise your end result because you're still addressing behavior, but you're able to have love and compassion for yourself and others because we're all just running on a default program unless we're in a conscious state. When I say a default program, of course, we're talking about the unconscious, obviously. And when I talk about the unconscious, I get so many people that go, yeah, I know, my unconscious is the problem. Your unconscious isn't the problem. Your unconscious is just the program. Thank goodness we have programs. If we didn't have programs, you would have to be conscious about everything. Your brain would have exploded by now. We wouldn't be here. We can't be conscious about everything. We can't even be conscious about making choices and being discerning about what we need to be conscious about all the time. We don't have the bandwidth for that. So your unconscious is doing its job. And its job is to create programs that result in you staying alive. First and foremost, you staying alive, surviving as a material being. And second, and very related, you staying in a place of belonging and relative safety. That's your unconscious program. Your identity is created to do exactly that until it doesn't work anymore, right? But your identity was created out of that programming to get what you wanted, which was more pleasure, less pain. And so is everybody else's. And that's really the most important thing for leaders to remember, is that when we look at the ourselves and the people that we're there to serve, if we're trying to serve them by looking at them as an individual and judging them, we're in this trap. If I judge them according to the behavior that's showing up, I'm being harsh, I'm being unfair, I'm maybe being unreasonable, I'm being mean, I'm not being kind. I can't be the person I choose to be when I'm sitting in judgment of another person and I'm thinking ill of them. Oh, what does that leave me? Well, I have to judge the person, right? If it's personal, I have to judge the person. So now I can no longer afford to see the behavior that's destructive to the end result. I can no longer afford to see the patterns that are not going to result in anyone getting what they need to get out of our work together. If I have to judge the person, I'm in that dichotomy. I either have to judge them in a negative way, or I have to ignore negative behavior in order to judge them as a good person. When I can just look at behavior as, yeah, that's the highest form of communication, but it's not telling me who the person is. It's telling me about the structure they're in, the beliefs, the emotions, the fears, all the program that's running. It's not telling me about the person, right? It also doesn't tell you how much they do or don't care. So this is the other myth that we get into when we look at it as personal and sort of the identity structure, is we go, well, if they really cared, they'd change their behavior. Anybody suddenly flash on your personal relationships, your kids, your spouse, right? They really cared, they changed their behavior. But caring doesn't change the default. Caring doesn't change how we identify in the world. Choosing, consciously choosing, and then practicing that choice is what changes that. So we get into that myth of if they cared, they do something different. It's simply not true. Here's what is true. Everything informs everything else. My posture informs my emotional being. It's an interesting thing. Our first physiological response to fear, for instance, is the fear of falling. So when we have a fear response, the physiological expression of that is to curl forward, to protect the inner organs as though we were falling. So what do? In most of us in our work, we sit hunched over a keyboard, hunched over a digital device. We're in the physiological posture of fear. And since everything informs everything, a lot of people are walking around communicating through the body to the mind. There's something to be afraid of. And guess what? When the mind goes looking for something to be afraid of, it doesn't have any problem at all finding it. We're good at that. We're really good at that. So when we have that clarity and consciousness of choice, now we start changing our environment, our activities, our language choices and language sets, our posture. We start training the mind because we're making a consistent imposed demand. That's how you change a structure. If you want to change the structure of your body, there's a principle in personal training called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand. Specific adaptation to imposed demand says that if I impose a demand consistently, I will get an adaptation that's specific to meeting that demand. If you want to change your structure of identity, or you want to help someone that you're working with change their structure of their identity, you can train the mind through posture, through language, through environment, through activities, and it will change the brain. It's a great book if you want a resource. It's called Train the Mind, Change the Brain. It's an incredible history of the last about 120 years of research into brain health, neurological health, and brain performance. It's incredible. It's incredible. So when you or someone that you're working with is exhibiting behavior patterns based on identity structures that don't create the end result that you want, we start with this: everything informs everything. Where can I start changing the structure? I can change the structure just through ergonomics. I can change the structure through changing language. I can change the structure by assigning them different activities or a different way to perform the same activities. And we're saying all this through a leadership lens, but guess what? The first person you get to lead is yourself. That's the person you're leading all the time. Other people, other activities, other missions, other objectives, you're leading part of the time. You're leading yourself all the time, right? So all of this is also true there. So your identity can be either your saboteur or your superpower. We're going to talk about that, but I want to demonstrate just how important this really is in structure. Let me stop the screen share, catch up with some. Yeah, thank you, Linda, for sharing that. That book, man, I have learned so much from that book, and it sent me down so many rabbit holes of research and classes and coursework and so much of what I do. That book and the work of Robert Fritz have been the two places that I keep going back to and back to and back to. The Path of Least Resistance by Robert Fritz is another fantastic resource. Unreflected patterning leads to identity creation. Linda nailed it. That's it. That's why consciousness becomes the key to creation, because unreflected patterning is just going to create a self-replicating pattern. When we start reflecting consciously, we can change the pattern. Absolutely. Let me check other chat. Yeah. Absolutely. If I give you space, there's danger I could lose my place in this world, this situation. The genius of non-judgment. Exactly. Oh, there's some great resources in chat, y'all. Those are wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Just Blow It Up. It's really funny. When I wrote Just Blow It Up, it was written, of course, for entrepreneurs. I've seen it used. It was the book of the month for the Amway book club. That surprised me. I've had people tell me they gave it to their teenage kids. It's written, some of the chapters are 2 pages long. And then people tell me I had to read that 3 times. Like, it was really deep. It's really fun. So why is identity so important? When you're trying to create something, which ultimately as leaders, that's what we do, right? We don't really lead people. I mean, we lead people sometimes who also want to go where we're going. I'm sitting in St. Louis. Lewis and Clark, anyone? They led an expedition. But we don't, our objective is not to lead people. It's to lead outcomes. Would we agree to that? That as leaders, we're leading an outcome, a new end result. So I'm leading a project that has an outcome. I'm leading a mission that has an outcome. We're always leading into a new end result that is a new outcome. So in that structure, we have 2 points. We have 2 endpoints. One endpoint is wherever we are today. The other endpoint is this is where we desire to be. We desire to be at a place where we can say that project is finished. We desire to be at a place where we can say I've arrived at this destination. We desire to be at a place where we can say, the world has actually changed in this way, right? Those are outcomes. Ultimately, when we're leading outcomes. If you're a solopreneur, you're leading outcomes in your business, you're still probably dependent on vendors and freelance and contract workers and colleagues, and you're probably dependent on co-creating with clients and your customers, right? All of you together, you're co-creating outcomes. That's the ultimate purpose to me of leadership is to be that inspiration and that support structure for outcomes. So the outcome is a new point in reality, right? Well, guess what? The identity that we've been talking about, which is not you, it's what you've created. The identity created the outcome you're living in right now, what we call your current reality, right? And it's been reinforcing that current reality for a long time. In fact, every identity that you've experienced, every understanding, experience, and expression of yourself that you've had so far is what created the reality you live in today. So we call that hyper stabilized. Like it's like you put a stake in the ground sometime around the age of 4 when you started figuring out how the world worked. And you started realizing you're really not part of all things and you're separate. Up until now, you've been driving that stake deeper in the ground. And maybe there have been times that you had some transformation and you shook that stake of who you think you are a little bit, but it's pretty stabilized, right? And then you go put a stake in the ground. Well, let's call it a twig to start with. When we first say, this is the outcome I want to create. This is the new end result. We put this little twig in the ground. We go, this is my starting place. This is what I've created of it so far. That's what I want, right? And we start moving toward it. Now, what happens, the old identity is always going to be in resistance to the new reality. Why? It's never survived it. Remember that your unconscious develops the identity pattern according to what it believes is survivable first and foremost. It's never survived the reality of this new outcome. So it has no proof. It has no proof that it is survivable. So your old identity will always be in resistance to the new reality. Always. So what happens is this, I'm going to use a rubber band. I want you to all just to think about, just have some muscle memory with me here. What it takes to stretch a rubber band. Tension, right? Tension actually is a wonderful thing. We experience it as stress. We experience it as tension as something we need to get out of. But tension, and this is where the work of Robert Fritz comes in. Amazing man. Love studying with him. That tension actually just creates a tendency for movement. So the more tension I put on the rubber band, the more tendency for movement when the force is released, right? You can all feel it. Your muscles remember what that feels like, even if you're not holding a rubber band right now, right? So tension creates a tendency for movement. In a creation structure, we have 2 forms of tension. One form of tension is that hyper-stabilized old structure that we've been talking about, the identity that you've created based on what your unconscious thinks is safe, the behavioral patterns that align to the old identity, even if they don't make sense in what you're creating now, right? So that we call psychological tension. So just think about that. There's a psychological tension to stay in your old identity. In fact, if you've ever done something, started a new habit, taken on a new role that was way outside your identity's experience as survivable, you're probably doing things that you're like, I just don't even feel like myself. That's psychological tension. We say, I just don't even feel like myself, right? There's also creative tension. Creative tension is what happens when the state of your choice is here and you want it to be here. See that? They're in direct opposition to each other. Your old identity will always, if you're not conscious and making a conscious choice, will always pull you back from creating a new reality. Unless you let go of the old identity and move into the new reality, it's always going to pull you back. This is why we oscillate. This is why if you're leading teams, you see oscillation. It's, we want to go over here, but we're here. That's tension. That's all great. There's a tendency to move into the new reality. Unless the old identity, and believe me, companies have identities, countries have identities, communities have identities. So it's not just the individual's identity that pulls us back. It's also group identity that pulls us back because we feel threatened when we're moving away from the old identity into the identity of the new reality. So does that make sense? I'm going to check comments. Yeah, as a leader, I facilitate group experiences that lead to an outcome or desired destination. Yes, Linda, you do. And gorgeously. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for finding the link to Robert's book. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. I love using a rubber band because all of your muscles are firing. You may not be holding a rubber band, but every single one of you, the muscle memory is firing in the neurological system. So you're getting it. You feel it. So we're going to go into breakout in just a minute. And here's the discussion I would love for you to have. I know I just fire hosed you, didn't I? Big time. Come back. You'll get used to that. Because what I really just did is I gave you a lot to think about. Really, it's less about trying to teach you and have you learn something. It's more about inviting you to think about things in a way you've never thought about them before. So I didn't really intend for you to learn everything that I just shared, so much as I gave you a lot of things to think about from a new direction, hopefully, that you've not thought about them before. But what I want to do is, let me get back into the slide. This is where we want to go with, it's not going to let me go back to presentation immediately. Let me just share my screen and we'll get there. So this is the discussion for your breakout rooms. And then Lisa's going to get you set up for those rooms to have some fun discussion. I think we'll probably have 2 or 3 people per room so that you can really have some time to discuss. So we'd love for our identity to be our superpower, right? Nobody needs, how many times do we say, I self-sabotage, I sabotage myself. I still look at that and I go, wait a minute, which self was the saboteur and which self was the creator that got sabotaged? I'm really like, how many selves do we have in this equation, right? But it's not our self that's the saboteur. It's the old identity that's in resistance to the new creation that's the saboteur. Or it can be our superpower. The identity, the more we identify as who we really are, our true self, the more power we have to create what we've truly chosen. It just makes sense as a structure, right? It's so wonderful. I just have to say, it's so wonderful that we can talk about this now. I remember several years ago, I was speaking for Venture Cafe, which is an event that CIC puts on. And I was talking about identity in the workplace. And I said, people identify with their jobs and their titles and their status. And somebody said, well, what do you base your identity on? And without really thinking, for good or ill, because I was responding straight from my true identity, I said, well, I like to base my identity on my soul consciousness because nobody can take that away from me. And then I realized I was standing in a room full of business people, corporate people from some of the biggest corporations in St. Louis. And I was like, yeah, I just really went to that soul place. Let's see what happens now. People were sitting on the edge of their chairs. And I realized the world really has changed because I'm in front of a bunch of business professionals who, when they heard me say, I choose to base my identity on my soul's experience and my soul understanding, people leaned forward and they scooted their chairs up and they're like, I need to know more. And I'm like, but we're finishing. So we're finishing until you go into your breakout rooms. But I want you to discuss in your breakout rooms, just quickly, a time that you know that your identity, the way that you understood yourself, experienced yourself, and expressed yourself by default, just thinking that was the true you, where that sabotaged what you chose to have happen. I also want you to share a time when you know that you were consciously at choice, when you were living in an identity that says, I have the power to choose, and I can train all levels of my mind to just achieve the end results. My identity is just the creator. I'm just going to create these end results. You've been both. I guarantee you have both of those experiences stored away in your memory banks. I want you to go into the breakout rooms and share one of each. Lisa,
Okay.
you ready for that?
I am. So we're going to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms. We're going to give you 15 minutes. So that's about 5 minutes a person. One group may have a few less. People are popping on and off. So I'm going to go ahead and send you in, and we will see you soon. And the questions I posted in the chat box that you can use.
Thank you.
Oh, let's see. Erica, Helena, and no.
Jane looks to be alone. Let's move her into one of the rooms that only has 2.
Yeah, let me do that and move to.
And then I think all the other rooms have at least 2. And then if people haven't joined, we can just move them to the waiting room for now and stop the recording. Or just pause the recording, not stop it.
I'm just curious whose phone number that is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Someone there? Can you share? No, it's going to remain a mystery.
It may be, I know sometimes people will be on, but they'll dial in and they'll show up twice. So that phone number may be somebody who actually was on a different device that was in a breakout room on a different device.
Just wanted to give them an opportunity because I think they get lost if there's not a visual, you know. There we go. So fun to see that all pots like popcorn. All the faces come popping back on the screen. Colorful popcorn. All right, welcome back. So let us hear. I encourage you in the bottom, you have under reactions, you have your opportunity to raise your hand. Love to hear what you experienced in the breakout rooms, what perhaps became into your awareness and sharing of when your identity was a saboteur and when it was your superpower, and perhaps also any insights in listening to your colleagues in the breakout rooms. So what's present? Who would like to begin?
Yeah, and just remember, if you'd like to share, just raise your hand. There we go. Karen's demonstrating. The hand raise is in your reactions. So if you're looking for that.
So 2 amazing women in my breakout, Jane and Laura. And one thing I noticed with what Jane shared was having to come up against some really hard things in life. Sometimes is an unanticipated gift to break down the barriers and the identity belief systems and to open up the capacity for the superpower to really shine.
So that the difficulty is actually like a portal and you can have those breakthroughs. Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you. What else? How was that for you, Jane, hearing that?
I was just thinking, how beautifully articulated was that? Karen's got such a gift. My goodness. I need to record you. That was spot on. I think it is our superpower. The other thing I think is we can, certainly for me, growing up thinking everyone can do whatever it is, like that is innate to us. You just think, oh, yeah, whatever, we can all do that. And actually, that's not the case. Often our superpower we dismiss and think not a lot of it. And then as time goes on, lots of people might comment and say, gosh, you're amazing at that. And then eventually it gets in there and we realize actually it is our superpower. It happens with such ease, which is amazing. It's so funny how it manifests, how it works, what we need to hear from others before we believe it within ourselves.
Right. What a beautiful way of saying it. And it's my experience has also been in working with people and also my own walk, that awareness of our higher self, true self, conscious self, however we want to define that, it gets lost. We come into the world that way. We have no other knowing than our own presence, right? But through training, history, all the structures, as Dixie so beautifully portrayed, those constructs that we create for identity, move us away in our awareness from that knowing of ourselves. And so the beauty also of this roundtable is bringing that back into awareness, that we can be conscious of who we really are, and then how we can lead from that place in relationship with others.
Beautifully said.
And Lisa just put it so beautifully, just leading from who you really are. We talk about authentic leadership, but a lot of times we don't go into authenticity as the core of who I really am.
Yeah.
And that to me is true authenticity in leadership.
What else came up from the breakout rooms? Please feel free to jump in. Yes, go ahead, Tony.
I actually had a really wonderful conversation with Dan, and talking about how Dan grew up and how in his early life he felt that he could that he was perfect, and was the discovery in later life that that he had to learn how to not only manage that very masculine energy, which then sort of segued into masculine and feminine energy in a leadership space, in a life space, and recognizing that if you're a woman and you walk with feminine energy predominant in your life, how that translates to the world and leading your team, your business, your life. And I'm talking about leadership generally, and how the masculine leads and how they work and balance each other perfectly, which led to, a really authentic discussion about masculine and feminine energy in a leadership place, and how they both, when they're working well and there's an awareness on your own triggers and your own life, what balances so beautifully, and how masculine energy can amplify feminine energy, and how feminine energy can impact and make that masculine leadership style way better. So that we had a lovely discussion around the complementary masculine feminine energy in leadership, and how that saboteur is subtly different for both of us. So Dan had the idea of that he grew up and was very confident in his he used the word perfection, which doesn't seem right, but that's what Dan used, and mine was imperfection. I never thought I was good enough. So it was a wonderful discussion between Dan and I about perfection and imperfection, and masculine and feminine energy. So fabulous.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. And we've spoken about that a number of times, Dixie and I, but also I think in the last meeting that we had, of the value and the importance of that polarity, that it's a dance. It's not that we have to be one or the other. And within each individual, we have the masculine and the feminine, right? It's not just a gender-based thing. It's an energetic experience. And when we're intentional with that, or at least aware of it, how that dance can be, what a beautiful way of expressing that.
Yeah. And that
Awesome.
shows up in identity structures as well, where we get the idea that we must identify and understand ourselves purely through one lens. And I think that's something that we've seen that's been a hardship for men and women both, not just in business, but through the business lens of if you're presenting as female, you must identify and put yourself in a box of either being female, in which case there's a lot of baggage that comes with that, or you need to identify more male because you're in a business leadership role and you're not really feeling like you can just embrace, embody, and experience and express the feminine identity. So we've manipulated our understanding of identity through what traits are valued.
It's an interesting conversation. I'll just add this little tidbit. My father he was Italian, and he had 22 cousins. 21 were female. And so in his world, you're laughing, the male was like the god, like there was, this. So and then he ended up having 3 daughters. All he wanted was sons. And so I was raised, it sounds ridiculous, but really it wasn't until I had my first child that I realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm a woman. I just had so identified with Matt. I can fix cars and I can build furniture and all these things because my father raised us as boys, right? Okay, I see Deborah's agreeing. What I recognize, and I found that as a hindrance for many years because I thought, wow, I'm showing up too masculine, to this, to that. And what I have come to understand over the years is there are places where that energy is useful. And there are the majority of places in my life where the feminine energy is who I really feel comfortable expressing. And so what I've learned is how to dance with those, right? It's not an either or, it's not a better or worse than, it's a relationship with. And so how to be in relationship with myself and these different facets of myself, which is what brings us really to conscious leadership.
That's right. It really is that the true self, the full expression of self embodies both, and we dance with it. But when we get into identity, we think we have to choose. And that's an artificial choice.
So what else is present?
Jocelyn's got her hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Excuse me, Jocelyn, please. Yes.
Hi, I had Helena and Bobby in my group, and we spoke a lot about the awareness. The self-awareness comes in when we can notice, what we were doing in the past were very much conditioned and is by default. And then, what we needed to adjust or stretch or change or, adopt a new approach. And that's where we can make a difference. So there was a lot of just quality discussions around that. And we thought that, look, we can take away and expand on that now that, Dixie's presentation was amazing to help us bring that awareness back and then, take it to a whole nother level or deepen the practice. So that has been most helpful. And Lizzie, I totally understand where you came from because I came from an Asian culture. So the interesting part was in Asian culture, if you're female, you don't really have a voice because you are going to marry out. So, you're not going to carry the last name of the family. So you have less perks. And even, it leads to even the distribution of the family estate. So it's quite interesting in terms of, your power, your position, your authority, your voice, your input into the family discussion. And it's always the men that will always get more portion of the estate. And also they will have more voice on the table and they will be given more space to create. Whereas female, you do the feminine stuff. And so that's that imbalance. Whereas, it's important for us to balance the feminine and the masculine energy. And for me, I consciously chose to leave my country, Malaysia, and my upbringing to really bring that balance into my work at the moment, because I was aware that I was actually not given as equal an opportunity as, where I would be in my family. So, that's quite a change in the Asian culture. I don't know whether in any other culture you might experience that, but at least it's for my family upbringing that is quite strong. So is the work around how to shift that and be conscious around the balance of feminine and masculine energy as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jocelyn. And that's a beautiful expression of how the distinction in your culture. of the masculine and feminine. I've traveled extensively and worked in dozens of countries on the planet, and there are every culture has its own way of expressing that, and it's not always male dominated. Just to let you know, but the energies, and even if there's a culture or a situation or even leadership that is off in the feminine balance, right? Very creative and flow, but there's not the structure and there's not the analysis of the masculine energy. Those businesses and those endeavors also don't function as well. So it's really having that balance and that interplay that's important.
Yeah. Jocelyn, for somebody who grew up in a social structure where women didn't have a voice, you use yours beautifully. Really, really beautifully put. And it is so true that the identity that we create, because it is a creation, is often in response to a social structure, or we create identities that fit a corporate structure. And I know, like when I left off working in the role of a consultant, my identity and how I showed up changed dramatically, because that was a structure that put certain demands. Lisa and I were just talking about, when I was first consulting, I was 1099, and they told me it wasn't professional for women to have long hair. And Lisa and I both love having, hair. And they said, no, you're going to have to cut your hair. And I said, oh, I'm W-2 now, because 1099, you can't tell me how I wear my hair, right? But it does affect our identity. And I love that you express that, because the other thing that happens that I would love for all of you to think about is when we have identity structures that connotate value. And a lot of this discussion around gender identities has connotations of value. What voice is valuable, what expression is valuable, what identity is valuable, what traits are valuable. And it's been strongly weighted to the masculine, which is actually harmful to men as well as women. We're not talking about the boys and the girls here. We're just talking about identity structures that are damaging and limiting. That when we step out of that, when I said I don't really want to identify as a consultant anymore, I'm going to dedicate my practice to coaching, my esteem and my ability to just state a fee and say that's what it costs to work with me plummeted, because I had walked away from an identity structure that I knew had a lot of value into an identity structure that was, oh, you're just a life coach. It's fuzzy, it's soft skills, whatever, right? So noticing that, and I love that several of you have mentioned noticing. I would say noticing is our superpower. It really is, because it's being conscious, right? So I love that you brought that up, Jocelyn, because noticing where the value structures are limiting you and your identity is huge. Sabrina, and so good to have you on, Sabrina. I see several of you that are doing this work either with me or in other structures that I know you speak of this language, so to speak. But Sabrina says it's about learning how to respond in the moment. When we see that flag or twin, there's 30 to 60 seconds of how to switch our brain. That's what we mean by being aware of the spaces between. Like there's that time when we can go from the unconscious saboteur, the old identity structure, into a conscious state where we just switch our brain over to an alignment with what we want to create. So
I'd like to also bring attention. We've spoken about the masculine, feminine polarity. That the structures that you were speaking of, Dixie, that we all, and I had written it as our personal history. We come from cultures, even if we're growing up in the same neighborhood, we all have different cultures that live within us. And many of the cultures, I work a lot with indigenous groups. And it comes to my awareness again and again that the things that I take for granted, like having an idea that I could be invited and then facilitate a round table with a colleague of mine, that has become an understood ability for me. When I was growing up, that was not understood. I was to be seen and not heard, right? And a lot of the individuals that I work with and communities that I work with, that thinking is not present for them. And so to lead in a conscious way in all kinds of groups where people are not sharing our culture and the way that we operate in the world, and to have that awareness of what is their identity, what are the structures that they're operating in, and being aware of not only our own, but also those with which we're interacting, and how to support them to find their own true self, North Star, and help guide them and help them guide themselves from that place of power. Oops.
So true. It is. I can't believe this. Like when we said we really want the session to be 90 minutes, we're like 90 minutes. Wow. Will people hang around 90 minutes? And it's been almost that. And I'm like, we could stay another 2 hours. Like I want to hear from all of you. But we won't. I promise we won't stay another 2 hours.
Right. So we're going to go into a bit of a closing round. Dixie, if you would like to share some practices. So what's really important for us is that not only is this a conversation and an exchange and support, but also that it's practical, that you take ideas and concepts or even offerings of homework or tasks, however you want to phrase it, with you, and to see how can I work with this so that this opportunity of coming together, the community that we're building, can be a richer part of your life. And you are also welcome to invite others to come to the community and to grow and to learn with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dixie, for your sharing of what we can take with us to practice.
Yeah, I do think of it as practicing. If you were learning something, like if you started taking piano or something, you'd go have a lesson, right? And then you would have, you call it homework. I just think of it as practices. It's just like, when I was playing with rubber band, which I've been continuing to play with, we practice the old identity. That's why it's so hyper stabilized, is we've practiced it. So this is the opportunity to practice being conscious and to practice being aligned with who you really are and the full expression of yourself. So it's just practices. I am gonna share my screen. A couple things actually that I'm going to share with you. There we go. Yeah, I love that picture, by the way, with the mask. That's just one I love. But one of the things that I'm going to share is Lisa and I had some people reach out, and I know there have been some good conversations. They're just like, just this little bit of teaching and conversation isn't enough. I'd really like to be part of a deeper conversation, a little more opportunity to learn, but also a little more opportunity to unpack it at a deeper level. And Linda had mentioned that some of the other roundtables had a follow-on group that they were doing. So we put our heads together and we said, well, we'll launch this. We'll see how it goes. So we're going to start Living Conscious Leadership as a group in March. And they will continue to be the Tuesday after this session. So we'll have the roundtable as usual, actually 2 Tuesdays after. We'll have the roundtable as usual on the second Tuesday. And then Lisa and I will hold our group on the 4th Tuesday. You can join the invite list. That's what that little QR code will get you to, is just put yourself on the invite list. And then there's a couple of things I'm more than happy to send you if you request them. And we may add some things from Lisa as she wants to as well. But a couple of things that may help with your practices. There's one that's an ebook that I wrote, kind of tongue in cheek, 5 reasons your inner work didn't work the way you thought it would. That's kind of a fun little read, and that form will let you request that. The one that I would love for you to take advantage of is a meditation that I wrote for a client who's deep in resistance. That is an I am activation. It's a really short little meditation. I use it still sometimes in the morning, but often actually when I get the doldrums in the middle of the afternoon, I just sit down and receive that instruction from the true I am, all levels of self, and then step into action. So I'm happy to send you those if you want to request them on the form. And if you want to just be on the invite list, get more details about the group that we're starting next month, that would be great. And that will take you a little deeper. But
Dixie, hold on. I just want to clarify for the non-digitals in the group, in case there are others, that with that QR code, you just hold your camera up like you're taking a picture.
Good point.
Hold your camera up and that QR code will bloom a little link. You tap on the link and then there's that information. Okay. And then you can request Dixie's ebook and information for our deepening group.
Yes. And failing that, if you'd like a little extra support, the easiest way to remember how to reach me is actually just dixiegillespie@gmail.com. So rather than giving you my whole business email, which is longer, you'll easily remember, find my name, add @gmail.com to it, send me an email and say, hey, I don't like that QR code thing, or I didn't have my phone handy for it. And can you just send me that link? I will be happy to do that. Thank you for thinking of that, Lisa. Good thinking. All right, suggested practices. These are just a few suggestions. You may have some things already that you're like, I'm going to practice this. But practice is really how we create a more stable little twig, so to speak. We think about that tension. The current reality is pretty stabilized. We've been practicing it for a while. That's how we stabilized it. So here are just some things that you can practice the other side of that structure. So I love to notice patterns of behavior and ask, what am I or they trying to feel? Am I trying to feel safer? Am I trying to feel like I belong? Am I trying to feel loved? What exactly is that behavior asking for? Because the behavior is always communicating a structure, and that structure is always either about something that we desire to have or something we're afraid of losing. So just ask yourself, in those patterns of behavior, what is this person, me or somebody else, trying to feel through that behavior, right? And then the next question for me is, how can I or they feel what they need to feel through a different behavior? In other words, if I really am behaving a certain way because I want to feel reassured, just somebody tell me it's going to be okay, you got my back, you're with me. If that's what I want to feel, but the behavior that I'm exhibiting isn't going to get that. It may have gotten that when I was 2 and even still when I was 6, but it's not working for me at almost 60. What is the behavior that I can start practicing that still lets me feel that way, but is aligned with what I actually want to create, right? And then always asking myself, am I in conscious choice here? Conscious choice to me is I'm focused on that outcome. Remember we said leaders create outcomes. Am I focused on the outcome, or am I focused on my limited beliefs? Am I focused on who I think I am or who I don't think I am? Like, who are you too, right? Am I focused on all the barriers? Where's my focus? Because if I'm in conscious choice, my focus is just what I'm choosing. My focus is the desired end result. So those are the just 3 examples of things that you can practice that help you notice, that help you start to transform your leadership and just be more conscious, but frankly, have more fun. I'm all about leadership can be fun. It's not this onus, this burden, this weight that we carry around on our shoulders. We are not Atlas as leaders. We're creators, and we can have fun doing it. So that's where I'd like for you to leave this session.
Beautiful, Dixie. Thank you so much. And I would like to invite you all again in the chat, if you would, is just check in for a moment of where are you now and how are you leaving the group now? What's present for you? And just put 1 or 2 words in the chat to share that, just to take notice of yourself, raise your awareness of where you are and how you're leaving today.